Hi and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave and this is episode 666 and today's date is May 13th, 2015, and the title of this episode is As the Economy Falters, the U.S. Escalates the Push for War. Now, before I get started, I have an announcement. Thursday, which is tomorrow, I'll be placing an interview of Fabian Calvo up on the X22 Report Spotlight. Those people who are on the X22Report.com email alert system, you'll get an email. Those people who subscribe to the YouTube channel, X22 Report Spotlight, you will get an email from YouTube. Everyone else, you can just go to YouTube and type in X22 Report Spotlight or come to the X22Report.com. On the right-hand side, you will see the sidebar with the video interview there. I also have Professor James Tracy. We are going to discuss Sandy Hook and the anomalies of the coroner's report. And then I have Bernie Suarez, where we're going to be talking about global warming, and this is coming up next week. So there's a lot more people coming on the X22 Report Spotlight. And if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, go right ahead. And if you haven't got on the alert system, you can sign up for that so you can get the alerts when these interviews come out. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, Greece is still in a bind. I know they made their payment. They drew on the IMF emergency funds, and basically they got themselves out of this hole. And we know from Varoufakis, Greece has a huge liquidity problem, and they're going to have trouble making the additional payments. Right now, the ECB, the IMF, they can't come to any agreement right now. And according to the international agency, which cites information from a European official, the Greek government must take new austerity measures to raise at least 3 billion euros through additional fiscal measures by the end of this year to meet the minimum budget targets acceptable by creditors. How is the Greek government going to do this? Because we have to remember, they were elected on the campaign platform that they were not going to push austerity on the people. And here we have the creditors saying, if you want more of this debt, with of course no economic stimulus, you have to basically push austerity on the people. And this is going to be a problem. And we have to remember, Russia, the BRICS system, they've extended their hand and said, listen, we will help you. We will get you out of this bind. We will create economic opportunities for the government, for the people, and get Greece back on its feet. And we're going to have to see how the Greek government works with this. We see in the other European countries, things are not going as well. I know they're out there saying, the European economy, it's growing. Well, you have to remember they're creating money at this point. And we know that this is not going to fund the people. It's not going to go fund jobs. It's not going to help the economic situation. It's padding the banks, the corporations, the governments from a collapse. Now, is this actually going to help? Most likely not. Because this is why they created the bail-in documents, because they knew all of this wouldn't help, and they knew eventually they would have to go inward and take the people's money to keep themselves afloat. Well, Spain's economic data has pretty much lost all credibility because they're following in the footsteps of the United States. Basically what they're doing is they're manipulating all the numbers. They're including everything into the count for unemployment. Drug dealers, hookers, it doesn't make a difference. They're bringing it all in. And basically right now, Spain's job numbers, it's part-time jobs, just like the United States. Full-time jobs have been declining. Part-time jobs have been increasing. The number of temporary contracts is growing twice as fast as permanent contracts. During the first quarter of 2015, the number of people working on temporary contracts grew by 5.42% year on year, while the number of permanent contracts grew only 2.71%. So basically, what we're seeing is all the countries in Europe will eventually start following what the United States is doing. and that is manipulating the numbers. And we know a lot of them are already manipulating the numbers and massaging them to make it look better. But as time goes on and things get worse, what they're going to do is they're going to really step up what they're doing here, and that is full manipulation. Those people who have fallen off, they're not counted. We will only count whatever part-time work they have as full-time. And this is what we're seeing. We've seen it here in the United States. And this is why they're out there telling everyone that the unemployment rate is 5.4%. Now it's at 5.4%, but what do we see? We see real estate declining. We see retail sales declining. We see GDP falling apart. We see factories closing, people being laid off, and we see a lot more layoffs. So as more and more people get jobs and are employed, the economy gets worse. It doesn't make sense. I mean, we see the retail sales right now. They pretty much missed expectations. They are absolutely terrible. They're blaming this, of course, on the weather, on Easter, on spring break. But when we look closer at what has declined, we see something very interesting. We see motor vehicles and parts that decline by negative 0.4%. We see furniture and home furnishing stores. Sales are down by negative 0.9%. Now, if the real estate industry is doing well, builders are building their homes, people are buying new houses, normally people will go out and they will purchase new furniture for their new home. But we're not seeing this. Electronic and appliance stores, we're seeing negative 0.4% sales. We are seeing food and beverage stores down by negative 0.1%. We see gasoline stations down by negative 0.7%. And we also see department stores down negative 2.2%. Very interesting, because we've heard from Macy's saying that their first quarter sales is down. Profits fell 13%. Sales are declining. We heard from Gap brands. Sales declines, and it keeps getting worse. Gap's comparable sales fell 10% last quarter. It was the 5th straight quarterly decline and the worst performance since 2011. In April, the last month of the quarter, the store sales fell by 15%. What does this tell you? People do not have the disposable income. They're not going out there and spending their money. They're nervous. They're worried. A lot of people don't have jobs today. A lot of people who do have part-time work, or they found a job in their industry but making less money, which makes it harder to survive. And as food costs goes up, and insurance goes up, and electricity goes up, it gets harder and harder for people to make it. A lot of people only have their paycheck and it runs out in around 21, 22 days into the month. And it's very difficult today. I mean, we are seeing many, many store closings. I mean, we see Pier 1. They're going to be closing 100 stores. Fresh and Easy grocery stores, 50 stores. Friendly's is going to close 14 stores. Coco's Caro's is going to close 70 stores. I mean, this is not like, oh, let's close one location over here. These are hundreds of stores that are closing down. And we went through the list since the beginning of this year, and we're talking thousands upon thousands of stores. And that means there's more commercial retail space that is open. That means more people are out of work. And if retail continually closes, where are they going to get the jobs? Now, of course, as we know, the unemployment figures do not figure in a lot of these part-time workers, because if they are not making a certain dollar amount or working a certain number of hours, they're just not counted. But if you have a part-time job, they consider you a full-time worker. seems like something's a little skewed here. And we can see from all of this that this economy is slowing, is faltering, is collapsing. One step at a time. We've been watching this, and it's been getting worse and worse as time goes on. We understand in the banking industry there are a lot of regulations that are out there, and one of the regulations was basically to tell customers about overdraft fees and to regulate them. And they couldn't charge them without the consent of the people. But we're seeing that banks aren't really following along with this, and they're charging people $35 a pop if their accounts are overdrawn. But the question I have is, why are all these accounts that are overdrawn on the rise? Because people are still trying to purchase things even though they don't have the funds in their account to cover it. Because basically they still want the food, they still want gasoline in their car, but they just don't have the funds, but they're running their cards through anyhow. And basically they're getting hit with a $35 charge. The report showed that 84% of banks charge overdraft fees for ATM or debit card transactions. And that's what worries me, is that these overdrafts are increasing. And it's getting worse as time goes on. We also see U.S. import prices have fallen by 10.7% in April, missing expectations of a 9.7% decline, making this the longest streak of year-on-year declines outside of the recession in history. In fact, year-on-year import prices have only risen 5 times in the last 36 months. We talk a lot about the real estate industry, how they're trying to bring in as many subprime people where they don't have any down payment. But we know this is not working. A lot of the buyers now are cash buyers. They're holding on to their homes. These are ghost homes where no one's really actually living in them. And this is just to drive the bubble larger and larger. And we see the U.S. mortgage applications, they are decreasing. The Mortgage Banking Association said its seasonally adjusted index of mortgage application activity, which includes refinancing and purchases, have fallen by 3.5%, and this is the week ending May 8th. Refinancing applications by themselves fell by 5.9%, and the leading indicator of home sales, which is a gauge of loan requests for home purchases, dipped 0.2%. We are in a bubble situation that is definitely going to pop. We've seen this before. In 2005, 2006, it got worse in 2007, and by 2008, people were just leaving their homes, especially when the interest rates ticked up. And as they kept going up, people were like, I'm out, my adjustable rate mortgage, I can't afford this house, and they just left. We are going to see the same thing happen once again, because a lot of those people that took out mortgages, they did it on adjustable rate because the payments are cheaper. And they can lock in whenever they want to, but when the rates start ticking up, a lot of them miss it, and then their payments double, and they can't make those payments. And it gets very hard for them, and they say, okay, you know what? We can't do this. This is what happened in 2008. Because again, what they're doing is they're bringing in a lot of people that really shouldn't be purchasing a home at this time, but they don't care. They'll approve anybody at this time. And we can see from everything that is occurring right now, the Atlanta Fed had to readjust their forecast to 0.7%. They said it was going to be at 0.8%, but I'm going to say it's going to be lower than that. I mean, basically what's happening right now is that the first quarter GDP, that is in negative territories right now because they're going to revise it. It's going to be like -1%, -2%. So right now, the first half of this year, we're seeing a negative rate GDP, or close to zero, let's say. Now, of course, the IMF, the U.S. government, the Fed, they predicted what GDP would be for this year. They told us it was going to be anywhere between 2.5 and 3%. Now, they predicted this in 2014. Now, what we're on track for is nowhere near that. Think about this. To reach their goal of 2.5 or 3%, depending on which one you're going for, let's go with 2.5. What are they going to have to do? Well, if we use 2.5%, they're going to have to grow the economy 5% in the third quarter and 5% in the fourth quarter. Or higher, to reach a higher number, depending on what happens. Do you really think this can happen without manipulation? Do you think all of a sudden this economy is just going to pick up and turn around with people losing their jobs? I mean, we look at the private firms like Challenger, Gray, and Christmas, and then we look at the BLS. They have two different stories of what's going on in this economy. Retail sales are imploding. Stores are closing. The housing market is in shambles. It's one gigantic bubble. Manufacturing jobs are leaving the U.S. Factories are closing down. The energy sector in Texas, Louisiana, hundreds of thousands of people laid off. Where in the, of course the BLS is not counting any of those. Where in the world are they going to get the industry, the manufacturing, to push GDP up this high? The only way they can do it is manipulation. Sprinkle in some Obamacare, they might be able to hit that mark. But realistically, with what is going on here, it cannot come naturally. And it won't. The system is crashing. They don't want to admit it. They're not going to acknowledge it until the very end, where they can blame it on someone else. This is what they're doing right now. And we'll be discussing a little bit later in this report where we are headed, because we see things happening right now that things are definitely accelerating. They're moving faster and faster. The provocations and what the U.S. is trying to do, they are definitely trying to push war. Because they don't want to be blamed for this. They want their system to restart after this war. This is the whole purpose of this. They know it's dying, but they want to control when this whole thing falls apart, so they can blame it on another group or another country. And of course, before this, what they're trying to do is prop it up. And this is what they've been doing for 7 years now, since the crisis of 2008. We see Moody's right now basically lowered Chicago's credit rating to junk bond status, citing unfunded pensions obligations and lagging tax revenue. Now, of course, Mayor Rahm Emanuel called this irresponsible. No, it's called Chicago's falling apart. Detroit's falling apart. And there are many other cities that are falling apart. A lot of states are falling apart because they don't have the revenue. It cannot be sustained. And we're starting to see this now. HSBC, they are issuing a warning. The world economy faces a titanic problem. And they're saying that the world economy is like an ocean liner without lifeboats. If another recession hits, it would be truly like the Titanic struggling to stay afloat. And it's just going to sink right to the bottom. And we know that the banks are getting ready. We know the central bankers are getting ready. The U.S. government's getting ready. The European governments are preparing. They have everything in place. Think about what they have done in the last couple of years to make sure that they are ready and they are prepared for what is coming. And of course, this is all in protection for themselves, not for the people. What they've done is they protected themselves with bail-in documents by recapitalizing the banks, which will not help in a major crisis. It will completely fall apart because most of the banks are they're not solvent. They cannot make it, and this is why they have the bail-in documents, because they understand this. They're nationalizing the police force. DHS has been giving all the local police forces, tanks, machine guns, and whatnot. So they have things in place for themselves, protecting themselves, and they have things in place to control the people. And it's not just the United States, it's the private Western Central Bank countries. They're all preparing. And this is exactly what they're doing at this point. Russia is out there right now. They are saying that the World Bank is playing geoeconomic games. They're not supposed to be getting involved in politics. And we see that the World Bank uses politics to play their game, and Russia is calling them out on this. The ministry cited the World Bank Articles of Agreement as saying the bank and its officers shall not interfere in the political affairs of any member, nor shall they be influenced in their decisions by the political character of the member of members concerned. Only economic considerations shall be relevant to their decisions. But of course, as we know, the central bankers want things done a certain way. They're basically pushing and maneuvering what they want, because what they really want is a major war. And they will use the political arena to get what they want. And this is what we are seeing right now. We are headed down a very scary path. And every day we report on this. Every day we see things that are occurring. Every day there's a new bill, a new law, military assets moved to different parts of the world. This is in preparation. Yes, you can sit there and say, no, this is impossible. Just because they're moving these military assets, it means nothing. But when you add it up, going back 2, 3, 4 years, you see the real picture. When you look at all the bills of you can't keep cash in a safety deposit box, you can't keep gold in a safety deposit box. DHS is allowed to go into any safety deposit box and confiscate gold or any other valuables in the safety deposit box. We can see from everything that has happened with DHS buying millions upon millions of rounds of ammunition. We see the bail-in document where they're basically going to go inside the bank and Cyprus the people. We see them manipulating all the statistical numbers over and over, again and again, to convince everyone that we're in a recovery. We see over time how they go into countries, remove the elected government, and replace them with a puppet government. And how we see them provoking war in all different parts of the world. And when you add all of this up and you put it all together, you see what is going on. And time is running down now. We're getting closer and closer. Yes, they pushed it off for 7 years, but this 7 years was to prop it up and to get everything ready for what is coming. That's basically what all this is about. To prepare the United States, to prepare Europe, to prepare for riots, for the collapse, and to prepare for war. This is what they've been doing all of this time. In the UK, David Cameron, who was just re-elected as Prime Minister, is basically trying to prevent Scotland from holding another independence referendum. And the First Minister of Scotland and the leader of the Scottish National Party, Nicola Sturgeon, said, "I cannot impose a referendum against the will of the Scottish people, but nor can David Cameron rule out a referendum against the will of the people." And again, he's basically laying out certain decrees saying this is what you can and this is what you can't do. But if the people want another referendum, the people have the right to do so. And I'm starting to notice and this has been going on for a while, and we discussed this many times, that a lot of these leaders are basically moving over to the dictatorship side. Not fully, but they're headed in that direction more and more as time goes on. Because basically what they're seeing and what they know is that they need to control the situation, and they need to have themselves make up certain decisions. They can't deal with the government bodies. They need to just go out and do it. And we've been seeing Obama do this for quite a while with his pen and his paper, because he needs certain things completed. He wants them done before this whole thing comes crumbling down. Now, is this all for the people? Absolutely not. Is this a democracy? Absolutely not. This is a dictatorship, and we're starting to see this with a lot of the leaders of the private Western central bank countries. Now, out in Afghanistan, we understand that U.S., NATO, never leaving. They're never going to leave a strategic area. They have the poppy field, which they create opium and they sell to different countries to pay for their covert missions. There's a huge deposit of lithium, copper. China's there, Russia's there. They are never, ever leaving. The Secretary General of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, says the Western military alliance will keep some troops in Afghanistan even after 2016 now. And of course, when they say some troops, it's a lot of troops. And eventually what's going to happen is they're going to add even more troops as time goes on. It's like the U.S. says, we're pulling all our troops out of Afghanistan. Well, the only reason Obama came out and said that is because President Karzai at the time would not sign the bilateral security agreement, which gave immunity to the soldiers. And they had no option but to pull the troops out of the country. Since John Kerry went into Afghanistan and basically tweaked the elections to the person they wanted, he signed the bilateral security agreement, which allows the troops to stay there. And this is why we see a ramp up of troops in Afghanistan. They never wanted to leave. They never had any intentions of leaving. It was a trick. And the only reason they were saying they were leaving is because they had no choice, because of the bilateral security agreement. Now, U.S. commanders that are training the troops in Ukraine, they are looking at the troops and they're saying they're woefully unprepared. It is a complete disaster. And they have them going through different training things like knocking down a door with a sledgehammer and firing different weapons. And they're saying the troops lack discipline. They need more training. And it looks like the offensive is not just yet ready to go. But they're hoping to have this done by the summer. Because, as we know, the propaganda is flying all over the place in Ukraine. We see Poroshenko out there. He is pushing more and more laws into the government to have them vote on it, like martial law, which the government did vote on. And of course, if you're looking at the Minsk II agreement, ceasefire, what purpose would martial law, why would they need that at this point? What would be the purpose of it? Unless you're planning to do something. Well, we see he introduced a new law, which will allow foreigners to join Ukraine military. Hundreds are already fighting for Kiev as part of the right-wing volunteer battalions. And it looks like Ukraine's parliament gave Tuesday its first approval to a bill that would let foreigners serve in the nation's military. Now again, if we have the Minsk II agreement, which is a ceasefire, why do you need foreigners fighting in your military at this point in time? It does seem like they're planning something, and this is exactly what's going on. Kerry is meeting with Putin and Lavrov, and of course everyone thinks this is all about peace and coming together and, getting the Minsk II agreement on track. This is no way at all true. They are there to tell Russia to back off. Back off of Syria, back off Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has warned Russia to implement a peace deal to to end the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. So basically, the United States, who's not part of the Minsk II agreement, who wasn't there, who's not a signatory, is dictating to Russia to uphold the Minsk II ceasefire that they created and basically had Germany and France with Ukraine come together and they signed it. So an outside country, which has no right to be anywhere in this area, is telling Russia what to do with the Minsk II agreement. Does that make any sense? Or are they setting them up to fail? Basically, listen to what they're saying. They're saying, implement a peace deal to end the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. It's very easy to say, well, Russia didn't implement the peace deal, and this is why we're going to war. This is what they're planning on. I mean, Kerry is out there, and they're going through the motions, the diplomatic motions of laying the wreath on the Russian soldiers' gravestone, meeting with the Russian officials, and basically saying that, our preference is not to have sanctions, but the sanctions will be there in an effort to try to secure peace that everybody wants in Ukraine. Well, if the U.S. really, truly wanted peace, they would have been involved in the Minsk II agreement. They would have been a country that signed off on it. But they didn't want to be a part of that, because that would mean that all the rest of the world would be looking at this saying, why are you pushing for war when you signed the Minsk II agreement? And this is why they weren't a part of it whatsoever. And we can see right now that the Minsk II agreement, basically, Kiev is not following it whatsoever. Joaquin Flores, who's the director of the Center of Syncretic Studies of Serbia, is saying that the United States is abusing the framework of the Minsk II agreement on Ukraine to pursue its own agenda in the Eastern Europe region. The Minsk Protocol was an agreement to halt the war in the Donbass region of Ukraine. It was signed September 5th, 2014, but by January, the first Minsk deal completely fell apart, and then we saw the birth of the Minsk II agreement, which was done in February of 2015. Because basically what happened during that period of time, Ukraine mounted a major offensive because they thought they were ready, and they thought it would be very easy to go into the southeastern portion of Ukraine, and they'd be able to take that over. But when they saw they were losing the battle, they wanted a ceasefire, and this is where the Minsk II agreement came out. Flores said, what was strange is that Kerry brought up the Minsk II agreement, and something rather strange to Russia, which was that it wanted it, or was urged that Russia would adhere to it, of course presupposes the idea that they are not adhering to it at all. And that is true. Russia, along with France and Germany and Ukraine, all sat down and signed this agreement. Russia created the agreement and they agreed to it. Why wouldn't they follow it? Because the last offensive, back in January going into February, the southeastern troops, they could have gone into Mariupol and stretched all the way across to Kiev, and they could have taken over the entire country. There was no reason for them to call for peace at this point in time. They had the upper hand. He said another thing about this that I think is a bit disturbing is that the United States is not a party to the Minsk II agreement, and I agree with that. They haven't signed anything. So it is strange for Kerry, as a representative for the United States, to be coming as a non-interested party. In legal terms, that they should adhere to some agreement. The United States is trying to set Russia up to say that it is in violation of the agreement. This is what they've been planning for. This is why we see the propaganda right now. Now, a German official, Gernot Erler, he is out there saying that Kiev should make more efforts to implement the ceasefire. We're not seeing Kiev stick to any of the 13 points 100%. Actually, they're not sticking to many of the points, even 50%. And he's saying, if we look at Kiev and what they're doing, a lot of it is belligerent rhetoric coming from the Kiev authorities. And I agree. Kiev is not sticking to the Minsk deal, and there is no penalties involved if they don't stick to it. There are penalties for the southeastern people. There's even penalties for Russia, but not Kiev. Very interesting. Now, NATO, this is coming from NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. He's saying NATO has strengthened its office in Kiev. All the pieces are in place right now. They're getting ready for a major offensive. The propaganda is now being pushed out to the United States people. It's being pushed out into Europe, trying to convince people that Russia now is invading once again. Why would they invade? Why would they bring troops in to Ukraine at this point in time? It makes no sense whatsoever. But we can see right now they're starting with the propaganda. And every time we see them start with this propaganda and continually push it out, what follows is a major offensive. And this is what we're seeing. Now, something very interesting came out of Rose Gottemoeller. She is the Under Secretary of State for Arms Control. And basically, she is out there saying that the Ukrainian conflict is not going to lead to nuclear war. At least this is what she believes. She believes that this will not lead to nuclear war. Now, why in the world would we even go there? Why would they even have to mention it? Just because the corporate media and Yatsenyuk is out there saying, oh, we think the Ukraine crisis is going to go nuclear, the United States really needs to come out and start to say, we don't believe it's going to go nuclear? It's almost like the Fed saying, we have the subprime contained. Yemen was a success, and here we are back in Yemen doing the same thing. Libya was a success, and Libya is falling apart. Iraq was a success. So basically, and I've always said this, whatever a government official says, it's always the opposite. They're trying to basically tap it down. Just like in the United States here, they're telling everyone, and well, actually they're telling the world, we're in a recovery. Don't believe anything else you see. What, you see people sleeping in tents? That's just one-off. It's not a big deal. You see all strip malls being closed down? That's just in your area. You see everyone that you knew working at a part-time job, not a full-time job? It's only in your town. Basically, what they're trying to tell you right now is that it could lead into a nuclear war, and they know this. If this goes hot, it will end in a nuclear war. Now, the OSCE in Ukraine is putting out a report, and the European Security Watchdog of the OSCE is saying that it seems a little strange that Kiev authorities are introducing these strict controls over movement into and out of the conflict area. And the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe said that its observers in East Ukraine Donbass region are monitoring the implementation of the impact of January's temporary order, and you know what these temporary orders are. This means it's a permanent order requiring that individuals, vehicles, cargo traveling into and out of the area have special permits. Papers, please. And a lot of these people do not have the papers. And they monitor everyone's activities, where they're going, who they're meeting with, and they're stopped at many different checkpoints. Remember, the U.S. government is orchestrating what's going on in Ukraine. Take that, and this is what's going to happen here in the United States. This is what they would like to do if there's no Bill of Rights or Constitution. What you see in Ukraine. Checkpoints, martial law. Anyone that doesn't agree with the government, you are a terrorist. We're starting to see signs of that here in the United States, but eventually they're going to continually push this here in the States. So whatever you see in Ukraine, this is what they would like to do here. Now we see that things are building up in the Pacific, around China, South China Sea, And we see the U.S. is allegedly considering the possibility of sending a naval presence and aircraft close to the reefs of China, where they've been constructing airports and other facilities on these Spratly Islands. And of course, they're doing this on purpose. They want to provoke China, and this is what they are trying to do. And you have to remember, as President Obama says, we are containing China, because they know when this war goes hot, this is who we will be fighting, along with Russia, North Korea, Iran, Syria, Brazil, Venezuela, Argentina. Beijing right now strongly condemns the proposal by the U.S. to send aircraft and Navy ships near the South China Sea. So we can see the provoking of China is continuing. It's becoming more intense. And what they're doing, each time they bring in more military assets into this region, they're provoking China. For example, they're going to be bringing in 48 Harpoon missiles into Japan. The sale is about $199 million. Japan intends to use the Harpoon Block II missiles to supplement its existing Harpoon missile capability. This sale will strengthen the capabilities of the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force and enhance its interoperability with U.S. naval forces. Now, as China continually sees the U.S. bringing in more military assets into Japan, like the Osprey, moving the base to a different location, bringing in more sophisticated weapons, this is set up to provoke China. This is what's happening right now. Now, out in the Middle East, what are we seeing? We see there is a ceasefire in Yemen right now. And we see that the ceasefire is holding, but Saudi Arabia is still striking the Houthis. They just struck a Yemen rebel convoy that was moving along, and they decided to hit it, even though there is a ceasefire. And we see Iran is escorting humanitarian aid ships to Yemen. Now, the United States is out there saying, listen, you will not enter Yemen waters. You will not dock this ship at the port. You need to bring this to Djibouti and unload there, according to whatever the U.S. says. And Iran is out there saying, well, we will give no permission to search the ship whatsoever, especially from a nation that is at war with Yemen at this time, which makes sense because the United States is at war with Yemen. Of course, they're using Saudi Arabia as a proxy army, but they are at war. So Saudi Arabia and the U.S. cannot inspect the ships. Now, Iran is not saying, we're just going to bypass you and do what we want. They're saying, we will adhere to the UN rules and coordinate the humanitarian aid with them. And of course, the corporate media and everyone else is out there pushing the propaganda that, they're not going to let us, or they're not going to do what we tell them to do. No, they're following the UN at this time. The Yemeni people, the Houthis, are asking the UN to create a mechanism for ceasefire monitoring because they're saying they're still being attacked during this period. And we see that, yes, they are. We see the White House right now is out there, and they're saying they're very concerned about the chemical weapons allegations in Syria, and they are looking into this further. And from everything that they see, it could be that Assad is using chemical weapons again. The propaganda is being pushed out once again. And every time we see propaganda in Syria, Ukraine, Yemen, Libya, out in the Pacific, the South China Sea, they are pushing war. They're getting ready to do something. And this is why they're continually doing it. We see the Islamic State right now is saying that an attack on London is imminent. The Islamic fighters have announced their plans for a bombing campaign in the capital. So the Islamic State is attacking London, and they're going to be attacking the United States. We can see where this is going. They're pushing and they're getting ready using propaganda for the main event. They're hoping to get the authorization for war passed because, as we know, wherever the Islamic State is, wherever Al-Qaeda is, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, or any other terrorist organization, the United States can invade and go after them. We see Representative Michael McCaul, is out there saying that many terrorists are using the internet's dark web to hide their movements. We're dealing with an enemy now that has a very sophisticated social media program. The Islamic State isn't just using Twitter, which anyone can read, McCall said, but they're also using the dark web. I like that when they say the dark web. It makes it sound very mysterious, which is absolutely ridiculous. He's saying the dark web is a collection of thousands of websites using anonymity tools to hide their IP addresses of the servers that run them, to protect users from surveillance and censorship, and to mask from where it's really coming. Well, wait a minute. He just countered what happened with Sony Pictures, with China cyber attacking, with Russia cyber attacking. Think about it. The United States government is telling us that they were able to track down where the cyber attacks came from. It came from Russia, it came from North Korea, it came from China. But here they're telling us the Islamic State is even more sophisticated, that they use basically proxy servers to hide where the attacks or the messages are really coming from. So you're telling me that Russia, this country of China, North Korea, advanced state actors, they don't have the same ability? Of course they do. So how in the world did the United States FBI, CIA, how were they able to track where it came from, where the attacks came from? Guess what? They didn't. They weren't able to do this. Basically, they're trying to convince us that only the Islamic State has this ability and nobody else does. Well, no. Basically, what they're telling you right now, and they're using excuses, they're blaming the attacks on Russia, China, North Korea, Syria, or any other nation, because that's who they want to blame. And they're saying they can't figure out where these attacks are coming from and where the original messages are coming from. And they're trying to convince you that the Islamic State uses the dark web. No. This is all propaganda to make you think that they are coming to get you here in the United States. Basically, the government is the terrorists. They're the ones who are going to create this. They're the ones who have teams already in place to go live. And of course, they added on that they're also using encryption, so we cannot access that and spy on them. Basically, this is going back to the Patriot Act. This is going back to the U.S. Freedom Act. This is going back to the NSA, where they don't want people to have encryption. All of this is to keep you all in fear, to get you to do things you normally wouldn't do, like go to war, like give up your rights. This is what they're doing at this time. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.